You're talking about where personal will comes in with holding and containment. And with holding, you said it's really to tolerate whatever the shitty feeling is that you're giving space for and consciously holding. That there's something within yourself you're having to overcome to an extent, obviously depending on what the thing is. And then it seemed to me that there's this conscious container for that shitty feeling that gives it a potential direction to move towards, a different like structure to grow into or change into. So with mirroring, are you reflecting how shitty that feeling is back to the person? But no, the that's not all that's going on. But I liked that tying in, because I think as people, as like I consider what these different steps are, there's obviously the consciousness aspect of it, which has a will of its own, which has a structure of its own, which has a direction and meaning of its own. And alongside that is personal will and like what you're noticing egoically that's happening simultaneously. I appreciated that context for what you're doing. That there is like when you go to consciously hold something, there is like some kind of like setting of boundary or setting of meaning for yourself, just to give yourself the space to hold the thing for the other person, or to draw that line in yourself. Or I'm not sure how you would describe it, but in addition to consciousness, there's also, what Lance has to do to do these different steps.
Yeah, it's a somewhat mysterious thing as far as what's actually happening when you shift from holding to mirroring. As far as the way I'm presenting it, I'm just saying it's a different mode, a different activity that the conscious mind is capable of, and I haven't gotten into the nuts and bolts of that because I have no idea what the nuts and bolts of that are. It's one of those mysterious capacities of consciousness where I just intend it and it happens. In the same way that it's a strange thing, right? This idea of these three different modes we can be in. For example, if you touch something hot with your hand, your body is gonna pull your hand away. So you could say that movement's initiated from body, but we have the ability to take control of our hand with our mind and move our hand around intentionally, and or observe our hand or have thoughts about our hand. But as far as movement, we can have the ego mind go in and do this mind-oriented movement, which, like I've said, generally speaking, you certain kinds of dance, for example, mind-oriented, right?
Yeah, there's that creating a delay there.
Yeah, right. And it becomes contrived, right? The movement's contrived. But what I'm getting at is there's also soul-oriented or consciously oriented movement where it's intuitive. And right now you can just move your hand around, but just intend to do so intuitively, right? And you start tracing certain lines, certain curves with your hand, and you can notice that flow state of like, who's deciding to, lift the hand up or down or move it in or out, or right? It becomes this creative flow that to the ego intellect, if you're honest about it, the ego intellect's just along for the ride, and it can step in and interrupt that flow, but it doesn't know the source of that flow. We're aware of this stream of creativity, this stream of energy, but we don't really know the ultimate source of it, right? Meaning the ego mind doesn't. The idea of awakening is all about starting to become aware of the source of it, and even maybe as the source of it. But so to make that discernment between, is it body that's acting, is it ego mind that's acting, is it consciousness that's acting? And so back to containment and mirroring, my ego intellect will be aware of, okay, now I'm doing containing, now I'm doing mirroring. But the initiation of that is not an intellectual activity. It's this conscious intuition, this conscious intent, right? And so it brings in that idea of conscious will, which is different than ego will. So am I speaking to what you...
Yes, absolutely. I think, again, like it's almost, we talked a little bit about how ego mind is like a narrator for what's going on. It's like you just said, like you're noticing it, but it's not in the driver's seat.
Yeah. And the conscious mind has to come in and override the ego mind in the same way that the ego mind has to override the body in lots of cases, right? The body would do its thing, and then the mind overrides that. And so same thing with conscious mind. It overrides what the ego mind would do. You know, you wake up in the morning and your body says, stay in bed. Your mind says, I gotta go to work. So you override it and you drag your ass out of bed, right?
Right.
It's constant that we're doing this. We're constantly overriding. It's amazing how much information is being processed and decisions that are being made constantly as far as what gets prioritized.
Right.
So to contain, for example, is an act of conscious will that is often counter to the ego will. Counter to your own ego will if you're containing yourself, or counter to the other person's ego will if you're working with them. I think this is what you were saying a minute ago as far as the shift from holding to containment is it goes from being resonant and, you know, kind of a oneness to, okay, now there starts to be somewhat of a interaction that is kind of two opposing forces.
And that's like you said, I think last time, just the resistance that's inherent in that.
Yeah, right.
Can be initially in yourself, but definitely and the resistance doesn't have to look like a struggle. It can look like a turn towards the deceiving or nefarious or calculating, or just, you could think like the effort to escape that confrontation doesn't have to look like a physical struggle. You were kind of right towards last time we talked.
Yeah, no, it's a psychological process. Typically, there's certainly physical containment that can happen. Like if your toddler's throwing a tantrum and you got to physically, you know, try to contain them. But containment in more of an energetic, psychological way is it's where the caregiver starts to frustrate the child, for example. I'm just trying to find the words, but because there's a whole thing in there that's about the transference process in psychology. When you start to have this object relating and you get the object splitting and you have this interaction going on, projective identification starts to happen, and then eventually just projection, and then eventually, you know, it moves on to mirroring. So anyway, we'll flesh that out more when we talk about transference stuff. But so as far as the dimension approach methodology and these 5 activities, actions, intentions,
wrenches,
right? Of the dimension approach, these 5 wrenches. When you said with mirroring, are you just reflecting how shitty the experience is? Sometimes that's the case.
Okay.
Because the idea is to mirror whatever it is, right? However shitty or however great. And the reason to mirror it is not to say, look how shitty this is. That more happens in the holding, right? You jump into the water, so to speak, with the person, and being in the water with them, there's an acknowledgement of how shitty it is. Or again, how great it is. With mirroring, the main function is that you're saying this experience is not who you are. You're discerning in your conscious attention the person from the experience, and then that results in various things. It results in an owning, ideally, an owning of the experience. Right, the person's mind starts to see it, and so there's an owning, but it's not who you are. It's something that you are experiencing.
Disidentification.
Right. And it gets super complicated because you can mirror to the ego mind, right? You can mirror whatever. That's what's so powerful about this stuff. It's what the reason that I'm making a big deal out of these actions of the conscious mind, to the extent that I'm calling it a whole approach and going to such trouble to flesh these things out, is that it has huge impact on our psyches. To conscious mirror is always to sort of mirror the truth, right? Let me just try to come at this with an example. If you just tried out for the play and then didn't get picked, so now you're sitting there, and I'm gonna mirror to you. It's like, okay, so there's this shitty experience of rejection, let's say. So there'd be a tendency for you to drop down into that experience and leave conscious self and just be in a self state. That's in quotes, right? This idea of a self state. It's like, what are we experiencing as self at any given moment, right? So there'd be a tendency to experience a self state as a piece of shit, right? and it's awful, right? Because it's like, even though conceptually you might be at a level of self development where you're like, okay, I know this isn't, the entire universe, and it doesn't mean, but you may spend, at least some time in a.
Concepts don't help.
Right. So you find yourself in this bad experience of being worthless. And so then if I see that, and if I am capable of feeling that with you, then I'm holding. And then to contain it is to contextualize it, which doesn't have to be via words. Again, it's just a conscious action. And then to mirror is to see the conscious you, which is innately valuable. And in mirroring your conscious self, your consciousness, your conscious mind, the particular essential aspect or essential point, to mirror that to you, what happens with a conscious mirror is the ego mind looks in a conscious mirror and sees the truth. So the analogy I tend to use is, if you're an adult and you go into a hall of mirrors that has a whole bunch of mirrors that are distorted in different ways, you're going to see these various distorted reflections of yourself, and it's going to be fun, right? You're going to laugh. It's going to make you look ridiculous in all these different ways, right? It's going to make you look grotesque. It's going to make you look freakish. A child can have an experience where they go into it, something like that, and they might believe the reflections and just totally freak out, right? Could be horrifying, can make them feel like they're ugly or they're worthless or they're bad or they're, countless things. So there's that analogy with conscious mirroring is it helps you. Your ego looks in a conscious mirror, and a conscious mirror reflects the true image, so to speak. Right? It says, okay, you're looking at this distortion right now, but so it does the opposite of what would happen in a hall of mirrors, right?
It's the truth regardless of what you think the truth is. I think that's it's alluded to in the fact you say when ego looks at conscious mirror, it sees the truth. Doesn't mean ego knows it's the truth.
Ego doesn't know it. It puts the person back in touch with their consciousness while in the midst of that experience.
I think it would be good to talk through what that experience is like, because like that's true, but it's not instantaneous, I think, is what I'm
Yeah.
alluding to.
Yeah, no, good point. There's a whole process in there with all kinds of subcategories. And there's mythology that goes with it. The Medusa myth is one that I use a lot with regard to mirroring. You know how the only way to defeat Medusa is to have her look in a mirror, right?
Right.
So yeah, initially the ego resists, right? You go into this, I'm a piece of shit, I'm worthless ego state, and whether you're in an imaginal state where you're literally some like, terrible creature, or whether it's just more of a conceptual state or whatever, it's like, okay, when you look from that state into a conscious mirror, the person doesn't suddenly shift from that ego lens up into that conscious lens, if is a good way to put it, I think. Because the truth is they're lenses, right? The conscious mind is the soul lens. The ego mind is the ego lens. If you're in an ego state, you're looking from the ego lens. And when you look in a conscious mirror, what the conscious mirror does is it challenges who and what you think you are right in that moment. And part of the struggle of that is that we'd rather be a bad thing than no thing. And initially, it's just invalidating the bad thing. So even though we were suffering the bad thing, we cling to that versus some kind of void or vacuum or, annihilation or non-existence. And I don't mean we do that conceptually. I just mean that's the innate urge or whatever.
I think it would be important to go back and contextualize the point at which you get to mirroring, right?
Yeah.
Because if you go straight to mirroring, then what you're talking about is the threat.
Yes.
Is that if you are living as that lens, right? If that lens of, I didn't get the part, I'll never get a part again. Why did I ever do this? Why did I spend time on this? This is who I am. If you mirror the fact that that's not true to someone before you've recognized it as a valid feeling and giving it a container to like potentially grow into something else, then all it is a threat to what I feel as my personal self, my whole being, my existence.
Yeah.
So I we're a few episodes into this process, but to remember that we got here because there are things that came before this. That you're mirroring because there's already that you've gotten to the point that there's a potential that someone's already looking for something within themselves that isn't this feeling of I suck.
Yeah. Even once a person starts to become aware of, okay, I'm not this thing, there still can be quite a difficult process to the extent that the person's locked into it because the shift isn't, oh, it was all untrue. I mean, ultimately it's untrue, but the truth is you do have that awful thing in you, so to speak. So you aren't completely free
You are
of it.
fully capable of being a piece of shit.
Right. And then, of course, that's when you move into this acceptance-based idea. That's when you move into more shamanic, imaginal
journeying.
Yeah, and the work of transmutation. So you become aware, yes, and ultimately the idea is you become aware you have the devil himself in you. Right? It's not just, oh, you have some, untasteful qualities or something. It's like, no, all the bad creatures that ever existed are in you. And you're going to have the experience at some point that you are them. Like, that you're the source of all that badness.
Right.
So people encounter that to varying degrees, and it can be quite horrifying.
Thankfully, varying degrees.
Yes, right. But so obviously, the vast majority of human life is, or human psychological life is defense against the acknowledgement of that, which is that theme I keep coming back to, that if there's going to, not only if there's going to be awakening or enlightenment or spiritual transcendence or development into transpersonal realms, and not even if we're just talking about personal realization, if we're going to have a society that understands human motivation and organizes itself in a way that's going to work to have increases in humaneness and decreases in anxiety and depression and suicide, decreases in murder, and we have to acknowledge that darkness is in there. I just think it's a terrible mistake to deny it and come at it in this shaming way that we're just gonna cancel it.
Yeah, it's bloody sacrifices continued for thousands of years.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's like if we lock people up in a place that locks up that part of us, we don't have to worry about it. Like we physically split off people.
Yeah. So it's like it's an attempt to eradicate it, right? It's sort of that strategy. It's kind of like, okay, if let's just round up all the people that have COVID right now and kill them, right? And then maybe we'll put a stop to this virus. And not to mention anyone who's racist, let's kill them, and then we'll end racism. Anyone who's sexist, we'll kill them, and then there won't be any more sexism. And it's just so obviously not how it works. But we're operating as though that's the way it works, I think.
Right.
I think that's more and more the cultural movement.
There's we don't value people learning about themselves.
No. And learning that it's all in there. All the bad stuff's in there.
Right.
And that
don't say anything out loud until you figured out everything in the world.
Yeah. And I know I'm always saying the same thing, but it's like it goes back to Nietzsche and Freud saying, look, repression is not the way to go here. I mean, it has its place. It has its place. But it's not, an end goal.
Shouldn't be the MO.
No. So the mirroring process is a difficult one. Depending. Sometimes it's quick and easy and a person just appreciates it. But again, the more deeply unconscious someone is in a particular experience, then the more the witnessing, holding, containment, mirroring, contact process is going to be. It's going to be fraught with more steps, right? More, not meaning more than those 5, but within those 5, you can subdivide them as far as what might go on psychologically for the person,
right?
While
at each of those,
of them, which just gives us lots more seasons of podcast material.
The value of the structure to it is that the same process is applied. So let's say someone comes in and like these steps are really fraught. The steps begin to make more and more sense the more you do them.
Right.
Too. And as you've said, and as like we've alluded to, like the goal is it's possible to do these steps for yourself too.
Yeah.
That there's the consciousness that is you this season's the first time you said it, so I've been trying to think about it. The presencing itself through you is the same consciousness, that people that is accessible to anyone to work with themselves, to hold parts of themselves, contain them, mirror them.
Yeah.
That it's like you said, we're not selling consciousness.
Again, as far as what is the dimension approach, the thing you just said, I feel like is really the main kind of insight that I'm trying to get across, which is what you just said, that the idea that across the board, whatever kind of experience someone's in, whatever kind of physical experience, whatever kind of mental, whatever emotional, whatever imaginal, whatever subtle energetic, these actions of the conscious mind are the general sequence of what needs to happen in order to get to where it's made conscious.
Yeah.
So it's there's maps as far as physical structures, maps for mental structures, etc. And again, this is a tool that applies to any of those maps.
It's about trauma too, and I think the maps you're talking about don't necessarily work under the context of trauma, or like if you have a physical map of the body,
Yeah.
this foundational understanding that traumas exist within different, within the body, within the mind, the psyche, subtle energetic structures, and that there are so many different things, and that all a trauma is a split from psyche to that area, or to that aspect of ourselves.
From consciousness to that.
From consciousness to that. So yeah, because the split could be in the psyche, sorry. So from consciousness to one of those things. And that to heal that split, you have to go through these steps.
Right.
And I mean, that there are a lot of different methodologies being applied to these maps of these different structures that don't address that foundational problem as you understand it.
Right.
That if you do not address the split from consciousness with regards to a part of body, psyche, chakra, whatever, it will never heal.
Yeah.
If you don't address that split within yourself, you will never develop in that location or in that spot. Right? There's lines of development. There's all these different things going on, but that is the challenge. That is the impossibility of not incorporating this consciousness work.
Yeah.
So I mean that's what the threat is to people who aren't doing it, right? Or that I think when we first started, I just remember you saying that you were ready to be confrontational about it.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you're being confrontational about.
Yes. Well, that's one thing.
You're confrontational about everything.
Yeah.
But that's personality driven.
That's true. That's true.
There's professional confrontation, which is more tied to your morals and ethics that you feel aren't being intentionally or unintentionally aren't being addressed by other people.
Yeah.
Other practitioners.
And an important point is varying modalities, like you said, different ones are doing these things to varying degrees, right? So like I've said before, holding, when Winnicott is talking about holding, I think he's talking about conscious holding, when I think mindfulness, is about consciousness and about showing up consciously. When you're mindful of something, you're consciously holding it, right? When you're doing a certain kind of body work, people that do body work and are any good at it, learn or discover or whatever, that it's this empathic process where the practitioner holds, contains, etc., energies. If you're teaching someone how to play the guitar or how to sing or how to dance, I think if in any of these endeavors, any of these modalities, any of these methodologies, I think a person can start to see that, oh, okay, yeah, for this technique to work, you have to, if you're going to get results, then it's going to have to get to where the person you got to go through these steps.
Yeah.
And they're just called by various names.
I think that's relatable too. I mean, there's just people that you go and see as a doctor, as a practitioner, as a physical therapist, as anything, and like some of them are good at it and some of them aren't. And like you don't always chalk it up to their ability to empathically hold or their ability to, provide a conscious container.
Right.
But that's part of it.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, like you're saying, the tendency is to either think chiropractic works or it doesn't, or acupuncture works or it doesn't, or
right,
therapy works or it doesn't. And it's like, well, it depends on is the therapist doing these things, and whether they're sitting there saying I'm doing the dimension approach, or whether they're saying I'm doing a chiropractic adjustment or I'm doing psychotherapy. They're always doing or not doing these different conscious actions. In psychotherapy, the research has shown quite conclusively that the factor that, as far as like, well, which school of thought is most effective, right, or which psychotherapeutic approach seems to yield the best results, which is hard to measure, but the general idea seems to be that the more there's a rapport between therapist and client, the more there's a sense of empathy, the more there's a sense of feeling heard and seen and cared about, the better the results, right? It's like that seems to be more important than any insight, more important than any direction, more important than any critique or analysis.
There was a study too I heard referenced in a conversation the other day that there was someone who was just going to hospitals and just like sitting with people after surgeries and just talking to them about how they felt. And like, and just the results were absurdly better than if that person wasn't doing it. Didn't matter what the surgery was, didn't matter who the doctor was, didn't matter what the hospital was. Someone talking to them about how they felt after the surgery made them recover faster.
Yeah.
And that was free. Like he just went and did it as a volunteer. So the most helpful thing didn't cost $10,000.
It's pretty good at witnessing, holding, containing, mirroring.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Right. This person had some gifts. I'm not saying anybody.
With this mirroring thing, I'm trying to figure out, like we said a minute ago, okay, there's within each of these categories, there's all these, like we could talk about the various phases that one might go through psychologically, right? And so it's like conscious mirroring, like I said a minute ago. I mean, it can throw you into an imaginal experience quite quick. And it can throw you into a very negative one, right? Meaning a very difficult, confusing one. And or it can just create some disorganization intellectually, because there's a change often. And then it's like, okay, so that's another categorization thing is this idea of kind of like you said a minute ago with my challenging thing or confronting thing or whatever, what your object relations are, what your attachments are, I mean, that all. So it's like what's being mirrored, and then what the resistance, like and this is a whole nother thing that we can get into, but it's like if you have this idea of these structures, right? Consciously mirroring and helping someone disidentify with a structure and the defenses that can be against that, and or the result of, as far as the overall ego organization of a structure coming undone, that's a whole science,
Right.
or a whole art, or a whole. So it's not just, mirror it and it'll all be good, right? It's mirror it and then watch what happens. And I notice, someone might just be laying on my table and it's like, okay, let's say they got a bad back, so to speak, and not so to speak, but quote unquote, a bad back, right?
So, something people say all the time.
Yeah. And let's say it's, their first chakra is really in a defensive contraction. And so it's, okay, well, they just need to let go of that defensive contraction. It's like, okay, well, is it a trauma or is it just a learned pattern, right? That's huge. And then another big factor is their ego mind cathected to that? Is their ego mind fixated on that? Is their ego mind split off from it and dissociated from it? Have they made it, are they identified with it in a way where they are making it personality? Right? These are all different situations that you can encounter. And so sometimes I notice, okay, the first chakra is in a contraction, but I've got to engage them on a personality level and start to attempt to help them loosen the personality structure that is a shell, so to speak, around deeper structures that need to change. Because they aren't going to let that deeper structure change if their personality is dependent on it. And that's different than if their character structure is dependent on it. Right? So there's this layered, again, this, the map from physical to subtle to mental to imaginal. They're all interrelated. So as far as which structure you apply the dimension approach to, there's a whole understanding that needs to come with that as far as how the psyche's organized and an ability to see that, right? To be able to see what seems to be structure, character structure, what seems to be personality, organization, what seems to be just a wound versus what's a trauma versus what's a learned behavior. Because when you apply the dimension approach to those things, you're going to get different reactions.
Yeah, it's like dumbfounding thinking about the layers of complexity, even as we've talked about the general areas in which you work. I think what you said, that wound versus trauma versus learned behavior, and that the dimension approach applied to those things, there's different reactions. So we don't have to get into detail about this right now, but my immediate question is like, did you learn the differentiation between those three based on the reactions?
Yeah, the hard way.
Yeah, right. I'll get the question.
Yes, although I think we've all learned the hard. Maybe we haven't learned, but we've experienced the hard way.
And that's what's so tough is like for me, for anything that like I don't understand, I've learned the hard way, I've taken personally.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah. It's intense. If you want to learn more about the Dimension Approach, please visit dimensionapproach.com.